Take that one over here. I'll take this one, and then clip the mic to yourself. Jordan, you all good for sounds? Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Excellent.
Oh, you've got a good crowd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you never know who's going to show up, you know? Sometimes you get like full houses, sometimes you don't.
Depends if you're in soccer season or...
Yeah, that too, yeah. Indeed. Good morning to all y'all too. Did you guys like the book? Yeah. All right. So when I asked that on camera, you're going to be a little louder than that, right? A little more enthusiastic. Did you like the book?
Yeah.
Did you like the book? Yeah. There you go. That's about the right level. There you go. I like that. Excellent. Have any of you guys read her earlier books, the other two Sunny books? Okay, so kind of 50-50. All right. Okay. Great. Nice. Yeah.
Well, now maybe sort of get into D&D.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I feel like...
Play Elven Rogue now.
Oh, cool. There, but yeah. Yes. Yep. So, hey, Mads, when someone comes up to the door like that, like, even go out and just let them know what the deal is, because they had that look on, what do you mean I can't go in? The store's supposed to open at 10. That kind of thing, so.
I'm here to spend money.
Yeah. Well, normally we do this on Sunday mornings, but for you.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was in Canada all week, and then I just couldn't, there's like no direct flights to Orange County, so, oops.
We all good? We are all good. All right. You guys all ready to start? Well, let these last two get in. Come on in. Pull up a seat. Very good. All right, Jordan. Give me the count.
Everyone ready?
I'm ready.
In 5, 4, 3.
Good morning and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of November. That's the month that it is. And our book this month is the fantastic Sunny Rolls the Dice, which everybody here loved, right? Yeah! Woo! Oh, that's a reaction. I love that. That's great. And we're very, very lucky to be joined here by Jenny Holm.
Hi.
Here she is. And I want to thank you for coming out and talking to us about this. My first question always is why comics? What is it about comics that excites you, that makes you want to create like that and do that?
So I'm from a really big family. I'm one of 5 kids. I am the middle child and the only girl.
Okay.
So I grew up with a lot of boys. And growing up in a house with all these boys, we had a lot of boy things. We had a lot of Matchbox cars. We had a lot of stinky soccer socks, you guys. And we had a lot of comics. And it was really the biggest boy in the house, our dad, who got us started reading comics. He was a bit of an older father, so he served in World War II, just for context. And his favorite comic was Prince Valiant. So I don't actually know where he got these, but when we were growing up, we had the bound volumes of Prince Valiant. These kind of oversized books. And so I read those when I was growing up, and I loved them. And then I read what my brothers were reading, and they were reading, you know, everything from, you know, first original mass market paperback Peanuts to Calvin and Hobbes to Bloom County to Ziggy. Do you guys know who Ziggy is? See,
Yeah, that kids don't know who Ziggy is.
I think Ziggy is forgotten, and that's the most Ziggy-like thing that could happen to Ziggy.
Sure.
Right? And of course, I read all the superhero comics. You know, you guys know like Batman and Spider-Man and Plastic Man.
Winter Soldier.
No, I didn't read
Winter Soldier was many years later. Yeah.
But
But it would be cool if there was a comic about him.
Yeah. Bucky was still dead back then.
He was never dead.
Okay. If you say so. I remember it differently.
nice.
Got his arm ruined.
Yeah.
So did you guys notice? So if we have like Spider-Man and Plastic Man and Superman and Batman, what are all those comic book characters have in common? They're all yeah, they're all men. See, back in the olden days when I was growing up, the 1970s, there were not a lot of ladies in comics. There was one who you guys probably know. I know, and she is enjoying a great comeback at the moment. But I never really connected with her as an 8-year-old girl.
Sure.
I think because I didn't run around in my underwear like she did.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It was just one of those things. And I really wanted what my brothers had. I wanted there to be a character that was a kid that I could relate to.
Yeah.
They could relate to Peter Parker.
Yeah.
I wanted a girl version of that.
Yeah.
That was my age. And so many years later, I got into children's publishing and actually started publishing novels for middle grade. Some that you might have to do book reports on someday, like The 14th Goldfish or Turtle in Paradise. They're like, yeah, I got to be on that one. And so I was in the children's publishing world. I was publishing with HarperCollins and Random House and Simon & Schuster, and I had always wanted to do a graphic novel, you know, aimed at girls with a girl character that I could relate to. And so I had known quite a few. My first job, I moved to New York City after college. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and then I moved to New York City, and I got a job with a production company, and they made animated cartoons.
Okay.
They did Pee-wee's Playhouse, and so they hired tons of freelance artists around New York City. So they would come in and they would color cells. So I got to meet a lot of these artists who would kind of float from, they would do an animated commercial, and then they would go work on a comic book, because it was all freelance, and I talked to them about how comic books are made, and so I had a pretty good sense of it. But I really wanted to make a comic with a girl, and I thought, well, maybe why don't I try to convince a children's publisher to do it? And it took us about 2-3 years to convince a children's publisher to do Baby Mouse. And this was back in 2003 when we finally sold it in. So we went into comics kind of in a back way.
Yeah. There was very little comics being published then for kids.
There was nothing. So
But Bone was out at that point through Scholastic? No.
yeah, it was like the same year. So Bone, and they colored Bone. They brought that out, and then Baby Mouse was I think it was the first original. So Random House did that, and then American Born Chinese came out with first, second. But it was all kind of bubbling up then.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge at the time was actually how to physically make it, because children's publishers didn't have an art pipeline. They were used to making a 40-page picture book or a novel with all text. So we had to kind of boot up a production pipeline, like how do we even make a graphic novel that's 90 pages, which was quite small, you know, compared to a lot of.
Sure.
So that was that was like the first hurdle. And then the second hurdle was, once you make the book, well, where is it going to sit?
Yeah.
When Baby Mouse came out, there was no graphic novel section, so it actually sat in early chapter books.
Right.
Even in the library, there was no graphic novel section.
Yeah.
So that's changed so much over the years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was really interesting.
I'm intrigued by the idea of spinning up the pipeline for creating these books, because this is not a thing that you think about anymore, right? Because there's such an infrastructure. What was the challenge of that? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
So it was really crazy when we started to do Baby Mouse. So And I think one of the challenges was that it was just my brother Matt and I. So Matt is my baby brother. He's the youngest. And usually at comic book companies, like at DC or Marvel, you have quite a big team that works on a comic book. You have, you have a director, you have an art director, you have somebody who inks it, somebody who pencils it, somebody who drops in the type. It was just Matt and I. So we had to figure out how to work together to get this amount of art made. And we had an art director named Kathy Goldsmith. And she's one of the most famous art directors in children's publishing. She was Dr. Seuss's art director. And I actually think I credit her for, being really innovative and wanting to do something different. And she was also incredibly tech savvy. So Baby Mouse is done digitally for the most part.
Right.
And that cut down on a lot of the headaches. And then we had a great editor named Shayna Corey, who's also amazing. And we figured out the pipeline we figured out was that, and it's not even typical in children's comics. So basically, I'll write out a Baby Mouse book or a Sunny book, and I use a storyboard. And a storyboard is what they use to make television commercials and feature films. And I did that because my first job, I ended up staying in film for about 10 years. I was a producer for television commercials and music videos. And so I'll write a script using a storyboard, and then I'll send it to my brother wherever he's living, and he'll do quick pencil sketches, almost from like a filmic point of view. So I always thought the most magical part of making a commercial or a documentary or something actually wasn't in the filming, it's in the editing. Because you take a lot of footage, and then how you put it together is what's most interesting. So I have him give me a lot of sketches that, is kind of filmic, like Baby Mouse is running across the screen, or her face is looking at the camera. So a lot of different angles. So he'll sketch the whole book, and then he'll scan it and send it to me wherever I am, because we travel quite a bit. And then I'll actually lay out the comics. So I'll do a double page spread, and it's still pretty low tech, so we're still on the low tech end of making the book. And I'll just settle out with 2-page spread of paper and scissors and sticky glue. I'll cut the art out, lay it out, draw the cells, and it's a good opportunity to see if the joke works. Do I want to maybe make what he drew, this little picture, make that a big splash page? I'll do that for the whole book. Then I'll send that back to him. He'll do a Sharpie marker version of it.
Okay.
Check in with the art directors to make sure they're happy with it. And then he goes from there, he goes straight to digital, and he does all of the final art on a Cintiq.
Okay.
And another way we had to find, the challenges was to find shortcuts along the way so the two of us could handle the art load. And so another thing we did was, instead of hand lettering, Matt created a font based on his handwriting. That's the Baby Mouse font that then Random House can drop in, or we can give that font to a foreign publisher.
Sure. So
that really helped with the process.
Yeah. Seems like a very labor-intensive way of doing it in a way.
It is. It is. So what we ended up over the years, we cut out the Sharpie version of it. So in the beginning, he was drawing the book 3 times basically. So now we just cut out the middle. He just does sketches and finals.
And your storyboards, how intricate are they?
So not very. So that's interesting. So my storyboards are 4 panels, or 4 columns, and I break them out. I kind of modify the way you do a TV storyboard. So I just have the top row is is narration, and then the middle row I describe the action, and the bottom I just break out the dialogue. Okay. So I do not over art direct him. I've worked with so many artists over the years in the film world. I've always felt like you get the best results when you let them do their magic. So I've seen how when you over art direct people, they lose that spark. Yeah. So and we have a shorthand because we grew up together. So
well, that was the other thing I was going to say is theoretically it's easier working with your brother. Yes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I can boss him around, obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
But so for the Sunny books, which are inspired by our childhood, they're not they're not memoirs or autobiographical, but the settings are the settings was like our childhood house. I could just say, this is the kitchen, this is by the phone. I didn't
Right.
have to describe.
Sure.
So
Is there, because he's the only one you've done comics with.
he's
yeah?
it, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to have one of my novels, Turtle in Paradise, is being turned into a graphic novel with
Okay.
Random House with a different artist.
Okay.
So.
Are you involved in that process,
I
or are you just
am.
letting them?
Yeah, no, I am. I wrote, I sort of wrote the pilot. I wrote the first 2 chapters, how I saw, to lay it out, and then I'm letting her run with it.
Okay.
She's the artist who did Bloom.
Oh, nice.
Savannah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very nice.
She's amazing though.
Yeah, great. When you did Baby Mouse, as we noted, there wasn't a lot of examples of kids comics, being done, especially in book form. What made you think that a graphic novel was the thing to do,
As opposed to.
opposed to like a regular periodical comic book? Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of the
instead of-
length and the depth of it,
So, I wanted it to. So I had come to appreciate I kind of fell into children's publishing, but then once I was in it, I just loved it. And I think the reason I liked it so much is there's a whole alternative market for libraries and
Sure.
for schools, and you want your book on that shelf in that library forever. So I wanted them to be able to have a book that would sit on library shelves. And but we wanted Baby Mouse to be like simultaneously not an expensive comic. So it was, I don't remember, I think they were around $6.99. So we wanted it a little bit like when we were kids, where you could buy them at a comic shop or you could buy them at the spinner rack at the grocery store with your mom, something that a kid could afford and just toss in their backpack. So that's why we limited the color palette to keep the price down.
Yeah.
But it came out in hardcover too, so that the libraries could put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And what was the immediate reaction?
So the immediate reaction from the librarian community was tremendous. It won an award the first year, and it was really embraced by the librarians. And it was still a slow spin up over years as more creators got into the market, and then it slowly built up.
Yeah.
And I do think that, a lot of the creators who are huge today, like Raina and Jeff Smith, although he kind of started in a different way, but Jeffrey Brown, we all kind of grew up together, and a lot of us growing up together was doing presentations at schools, on the road,
Right.
saying comics are fine to read, they have literacy value, and now everybody is accepting of that.
Yeah.
But I think for about 10 years, we were just very lonely.
Yeah.
It was the same, 5 to 10 of us going to every conference saying, comics are good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, and getting a lot of suspicion from a lot of older teachers and a lot of older
Yes.
librarians, like, that's not reading, that will make kids not read. It's the thing I never understood, that if you're reading, how could you not read?
I know, and I think now I feel like in the last 4 years, it's just 3 or 4 years, we've officially burst through that.
Yeah.
It's done. We're okay. We're through
Yeah.
that wall.
Yeah.
And there's still some little concerns that if your child just reads graphic novels, they'll never read a novel.
Right.
And I'm here to say, it's fine. I write novels. I write thoughtful historical novels for children, and I write graphic novels, and my readers read both of them.
So what would you, although obviously you're working with your brother in a very particular way, so
Yeah.
though this may not be as wide of an answer, but what would you say the difference between writing prose and writing comics is?
So I actually prefer writing comics now. I love collaborating. I think what's different is you have to step back from the text sometimes. You have to let the images speak for themselves, and that can be a little hard for writers. You get a little wordier, and you want to have several paragraphs, but
Yeah.
you have to be much more concise.
Yeah.
And sometimes just let the image serve the story instead of the text.
Have you, do you give a lot of thought to, say, the page turn, or how a thought flows on a page?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think a lot about page turns. how I end a chapter, the last moment, just so you kind of linger on, a character's face like Sunny, so you really get the emotion of how they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a different set of muscles than writing a novel, obviously, right? Because you don't have to think about page turn. You don't even know where the pagination will be necessarily in a novel, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, actually.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And sometimes, with Sunny, I've overwritten the storyboard, the manuscript, by sometimes 40 pages, and I've gotten much better at this. And so Matt has had to draw all this extra art that just ends up on the floor. So now I'm become a much tighter writer for the graphic novels to save his hand.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you guys have any questions about any of this early stuff? About the process, about writing? No? All right, well, fine, I'm trying.
She's thinking. She's got to think on.
Or questions in general for Jenny. We can start taking questions now if you want. Go for it. You had it.
I'm thinking.
It's
All right,
okay.
it's totally fine. Yeah.
When did you first start D&D with your brothers?
When did so we have a picture. The picture in the back of it, let me take a look at myself. Let's look at my goofy picture, you guys. So that is me in our basement. So I thought I was 10 or 11. So, so I had all these brothers, but then I lived in the suburbs outside of Philly in a little town called Audubon, which nobody's heard of. And it was this whole thing in our neighborhood where everybody had basements, and like one year it seemed like all the parents figured out that you could get rid of your kids if you finished your basement, and you could put them downstairs, and you could have your house back again. And so you wouldn't have your kids, running around and trashing your house. And for like every single house on our block that had boys put in finished basements that year. So we all of a sudden, this whole Longspur Road had a lot of finished basements, and we had a lot of boys on the block. There was only one other girl on the block besides me, who was my age. And so I don't know whose brother introduced D&D to the block, but we had the original, the light blue original box set, and we started playing, and we just loved it. We would play mostly in the winter months. Yes?
Were you friends with majority boys just because you grew up with so many in your neighborhood, or were you like at school friends with girls and hang out with girls?
That is a good question. So I was friends with boys at home, and I was friends with girls at school. And it was very complicated to me because I was not the least bit interested in boys. After growing up with that many boys in the house, I found nothing charming about them whatsoever. I mean, I did not get married till I was 30 for that reason. I was sick of boys. But I liked playing with the boys. So we grew up near like the woods, and we would spend all day. I mean, our parents would kick us out at 9 in the morning. We would eat at somebody's house. We would survive. We lived on our bicycles, and we'd be called home at dinner time, and then we'd go back out. And we played in the woods. We built tree forts all over the woods. We played. One of the dads painted our cul-de-sacs so that we had a baseball diamond. So we would play softball and wiffle ball and kickball. And so I loved playing with the boys because, my parents they gave me a canopy bed and painted my room pink, but I could do whatever the boys could do. I climbed trees and did all that stuff. And so I do remember this specific moment, like in 6th grade when we started middle school, where the girls started to pull away, and all of a sudden it wasn't cool for me to play with the boys after school. They were doing other things, like starting to put hot roller, curlers in their hair. And I remember thinking, all the fun is ending. Like, why does this have to happen? And I was right, actually. So at school I did hang out with the girls, yes.
And also, about Dane, was he like based off of one of your brothers, or was he just like kind of an extra character that you added just to make the plot line more interesting?
Yeah, so Dale's is inspired by a family member who had like a drug problem, and we watched it as children, and it was just one of those things. It's like watching a car crash, and you can't do anything about it. And it was a very different culture at the time. in the 70s, parents and kids didn't talk about problems. Like, in fact, you were discouraged about talking about things that were going on in your house, like if your dad lost his job or your parents were getting a divorce. Like, that was really shunned. You were not supposed to talk. It was like called airing dirty laundry. You really weren't supposed to do that. Nowadays, all the grown-ups have grown up, and we want to talk about these things with our kids. But then you weren't, and so it was very hard to process your feelings.
Yeah, it's interesting because I sometimes feel that that we're the parents that we are so involved, like helicopter parents,
Almost too much.
because
I know.
our parents were so just go and do your own thing. Go off and play in the woods
Yep.
and come back, and don't be around the house at all, you
Yes.
know? Right? Yeah. Well, all the adults are going, yeah.
I agree. I think we've swung too far the
Yeah,
other way.
yeah,
I have a 12-year-old and a
yeah,
16-year-old, and I
yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little sad, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Where we're just always in your lives, and, I know you guys don't necessarily like it. You had a question.
On this part, when she says, "How's it going down there?" and Sonny says, "I just got attacked by a giant spider," does this character know that they were playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Did the mom know? No. Mom didn't know what was going on.
Like the spider, like
As real-
visited?
She probably thought that Sonny was exaggerating because spiders hang out in basements, of course.
So it was just like a normal spider.
Yeah. Good reading. Very close.
Were you, because I don't, there's nothing about it in the book that I remember, but at the time, there was a lot of concern in some areas that Dungeons and Dragons was,
Right.
like the gateway to Satan.
Yeah, so it's funny. So it's funny that this, so this book has been, it's been in production for years
Yeah.
now, and now D&D is enjoying a great renaissance,
Sure.
right? And when it first came out, there was definitely, it wasn't at the beginning. It wasn't the first few years. It was just a couple years after that. There was a bit of a backlash against Dungeons and Dragons because they thought it would. It was a little too demonic and talking about monsters, and kids might get the wrong idea. And then I think like a bunch of boys were doing stuff in the woods somewhere with
Or
swords.
got lost in the tunnels or something like
there's
that, I
something-
seem to remember.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so there was like a little bit of parents freaking out.
Yeah.
None of the parents on my block freaked
Okay.
out. I mean, because we were already. I don't think our parents even knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
Actually, I can guarantee you they had no idea what we were doing.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because I remember there being like a television movie with maybe Tom Hanks as a young
That sounds about right.
man who got sucked into D&D and then
the dark side.
The dark side, yeah. Very funny.
We turned out okay.
We all turned out okay. Yeah. Any other questions? There were more hands. I'll take parent questions if you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm actually writing a little bit myself. I'm wondering. I have a daughter, and I'm writing first-person narrative from a girl's perspective.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you ever thought about. Obviously, it hasn't been an issue about alienating half of your potential audience by writing from a girl's perspective, or vice versa. If there's any thought to that, or how you sort of mitigate that, or if you just write naturally and just hope that voice translates across both genders, and that people, if you have any thoughts, or
So I don't. So we kind of learned that lesson in it early on. So Baby Mouse is it's two colors, it's black and white and pink. And when it came out, we did assume that. I mean, we made it deliberately for girls because there was nothing really there in the market for elementary school girls, and we assumed that only girls would read it, and we had that smacked right into our face because half of our readers are boys. I mean, my brother has a shirt now that he wears. It says, "It's not pink, it's lightish red," And boys don't care. And, you see boys reading everything that the girls are reading. It really doesn't matter. I think if it's a compelling story, they're not going to care at all. And I've written from the point of view of a boy in a novel, and I have girls and boys read the novel, so it doesn't matter.
Your second comic series with your brother is Squish.
Squish, and it's about a boy amoeba.
Yeah. And so was that, I guess, to follow up on that question, was there any sort of conscious thought there that we're going to do a more boy comic?
Right, so that was that came out sort of early after Baby Mouse came out, and we were getting some pushback initially from parents, honestly, that the boys were reading this pink book, and so our publisher said, well, do you want to do another book, maybe use a different color, and Matt, my brother, who had been drawing all these books about his sister, so basically I'm Baby Mouse, that's my childhood. And he said, well, what about me? I have some ideas too. So Squish is more about his boyhood, I guess,
Right.
as an amoeba.
Yeah. And, well, with that in mind, did that change the writing process for you?
Yes, it was much harder.
Yeah.
Because it was more his experiences. So he's 6 years younger, and he had a best friend who's a boy and a best friend who was a girl when he was younger, that they would all play together. So that's like a three is a funny dynamic.
Right.
So the books are a little bit about that, and so it was harder. Yeah, that was much harder.
Yeah. Did you get notes from him before writing, or did you write and then have him correct you, or?
I'm trying to think. So he is always very involved in the writing because Matt's previous job, he was in industry, he was a magazine editor. So he was a writer himself. And he was used to, he worked for Hearst, and so he is used to editing people. So he's always been involved in the writing. I usually do the first draft and then I send it to him and he'll rewrite a lot of stuff. Or if I get stuck, I'll just say, Matt, I need a funny button on this scene. Write something funny. He's got a very dry wit, so a lot of the original humor in Baby Mouse, I feel, came from his attitude. And it was Squish, it was tricky. It was hard. It was not as easy as Baby Mouse.
There's an awful lot of Baby Mouse books.
There are 20 Baby Mouse
20,
books.
wow. I was actually thinking there were 16. So yeah, 20, wow.
I know.
That's a ton.
That's 2,000 pages of art.
Yeah, wow.
I know.
Wow. Did it get harder and harder?
It got easier to do. I think the biggest challenge was originally the way publishers at children's publishers like you to bring out several books at a time.
Sure.
So for the first year of Baby Mouse, we had 4 books out that year, which
right.
just about killed us.
Sure.
And then the next year we went down to 3, which almost killed us too.
Yeah.
And then I think we went down to 3 the next year. And then I don't remember the exact timeline, but at one point we dropped to 2 for Baby Mouse, and we were spinning up Squish, so we were back to this breakneck pace of 4 a year. What became hard was keeping up that pace, and we had to slowly push back on the editor and say, you just can't keep up that slog for that long of a time. So, and also I had kids, and you guys get in the way. You want to be fed, you want diapers changed, we have to drive you around. So.
What's your work process like?
So our work process is a little weird. So when you work for yourself, you work 24/7 in a way. So I'm not one of these. I know you're like, I know. You're never off.
It's true. Yeah.
I'm not, like a Stephen King who sits down at 9 in the morning and does 5,000 words. Is done at 5.
Yeah.
We usually work 7 days a week. We joke that we had our first proper vacation was last summer, where he took a month off and I took 2 weeks off and did not answer any email for the first time in 15 years.
Yeah.
And we almost didn't even know what to do with ourselves. We're usually working on 3 or 4 projects at the same time. So I might be working on a manuscript for a Sunny book while he's penciling one book and doing inks for a different book. So we pass the workload back and forth, and he's in his office. He has this massive, insane Excel spreadsheet of every deadline. We don't miss deadlines. We're good that way. We did one early on, and then we learned our lesson. So I usually
Well, it just makes the next one harder.
Yes, I know.
That's the real problem
Exactly.
with deadlines. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah, it's just you're just going to snowball
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
just a disaster.
Yeah.
So I usually take my daughter to school and then I come home and I put her around and I make myself sit down and then I realize I'm not going to get anything done. So I waste time on Facebook or I do the dishes and chase the cat, and then I'll just start getting into a good writing groove, and then it's time to pick her up. And then I'll bring her home. And it's changed over the years depending on like when they were babies and
Sure.
toddlers. Now I find I get my best writing done from like 3 into 7
Okay.
when they're home, and I am ignoring them. So I am reverting a little to my parents' attitude. So it was really funny. So I famously say, "Get out of the house, leave me alone." And my friends, one of my son's best friends, came to like a book signing, and Matt and I always draw a baby mouse, and we say we can have baby mouse, be whatever kind of baby mouse. And she said, "I want to draw her as Jenny saying, 'Get out of the house, kids, leave me alone so I can write.'" So, now I just kind of write in the afternoon. I almost always write all weekend now. I don't know why. I find that's a good time, probably because my husband's home and he can wrangle them.
Right.
Although they're old enough to ignore. And then it's turned out lately Monday's my Saturday, Sunday, where I sleep in late after the kids, and then it's weird. It's a very weird world.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting because I talk to a lot of cartoonists who are like, I got to work first thing in the morning, or I can only work at nighttime. Yeah.
I think the best advice I've ever gotten is from Jeffrey Brown, actually, and his trick is he doesn't finish a section or a chapter. He leaves the end to do the next morning.
Yeah.
And it works because then you are not faced with a blank page. So I will not finish a chapter or a scene, and then I'll start with that, and that you get your flow going.
Yeah.
And it's in the last couple of years since you told me that, I'm like, oh, thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah. A blank page can be really daunting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing.
Yeah.
So what I do now, I of course suffer from writer's block like everybody. And I find I get my best ideas, of course, like when I'm in the shower or I'm driving the kids to school for some reason or picking them up. And now they're very good if I say, text me this line. Like, I just found a good line. They're like, fine, Mom. Okay. So they're my scribes now in the car.
Yeah, neat. Question, guys? You've had time to think? Really? You guys usually give me such good questions.
You need more sugar.
You don't have an editing note? You always have an editing note. Wow.
You have an editing note.
No, he's really good at reading these books and going, okay, look, on page 7, this happens, and then 14 pages later, this doesn't make any sense. He's really good at that.
That's good.
So you must have done a really good job if he can't find anything.
Good consistency, good copy editing. I feel the pain of copy editing sometimes. I do.
Yeah.
So what did you guys think? Do you think it was fun to grow up in the 70s?
Yes, I don't want to grow up in the 21st century. I'm always like, why can't I just be born in like the 80s or something?
That's what my daughter says. She's like, it seems like it was so fun.
Yeah, I constantly
It was-
talk about it.
Yeah, it was a lot less complicated.
It was.
That time seemed fun.
Yeah.
Except for that was the time setting of Stranger Things, so maybe not.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
That's why I want to live in that time.
Oh, is that why? Okay. Yeah.
Because of Stranger.
Yeah.
You had a question, Noah?
I was just wondering what your favorite character was, like what type of class.
I was a cleric.
A cleric?
Yes.
Because it's funny how they kind of guilt their friend into being the cleric. So since reading this book with my son, it reminded me how fun D&D is.
So fun.
I run an after-school program, and I bought the D&D books for my middle school kids, and they're now, someone's actually DMing, dungeon mastering.
I love it.
And it's a kid that's doing it, so I was just so ecstatic. I thought I'd have to have one of my teachers take it on and this is how you do it, but no, they were already playing at home and now they get to play at school too.
And I saw, even in the player's handbook, the picture of the cleric, he was actually a dwarf, so I don't know why that guy was convincing him to be a human, because clerics can be dwarves too.
In the new handbooks, they can. In the
But back in the
original handbooks, there weren't as many. Like now, you can be a who knows. You can
You
probably
could be anything.
You can pretty much be
Yeah.
a flying orc who is magic using cleric. But then you were very limited by what you could be.
Yeah, dwarfs could not be clerics back then.
Yeah.
The idea was that they were godless and they had no, ability to call upon their gods because they didn't have any.
Yeah. so I still have all my stuff. So I have my. We had this D&D box in my parents' basement, so I still have my character. And I was really obsessed with Lloyd Alexander, who wrote The Black Cauldron. And so, of course, I was Elin Wee. So my character was Elin Wee, who's the girl character. I was really into cloaks, and I had all the minifigs too. I had tons of, and I still have all the minifigs. And I still have the monster manual. And then I got married, and my husband jokes that he married me for my monster manual. He didn't have one, and he was a geeky only child.
Made me sell mine.
Yes. Oh.
You in the part where you went to the comic store place, here, or you got the monster manual for Christmas.
Yep.
So then you bought the figurine by yourself.
Yeah, so it was funny, like you were saying. So we had a store. I mean, so I grew up by a big mall, and in the mall, I'm trying to remember. It was a comic book store, but in the back of the store is where they had all of the games. But they had a glass case at the front where they had all of the figurines, and they were just. It seemed like there were hundreds of them because they didn't just carry the D&D figurines. They also had like generic, a lot of like Napoleonic fighter, like war figurines, and they weren't that expensive. And I started babysitting when I was 12 years old. I was babysitting other people's baby for many years, and so I had my own pocket money. And the other thing was you were supposed to paint them, but I only ever painted one, and they don't look very good painted. Like you had to be a really good artist to do it. So yeah, so we bought all the minifigs. I had a whole crew. And I'm sure they still sell them.
Yeah, they have a whole line of minifigures in the game store.
Down the street.
And they have painted ones also. You don't need to paint
The
them.
painted ones were hard. You had this little paint thing, and I just never did it.
Yeah, I think that the most famous thing from that game store was like something called something Hammer 2000.
Warhammer.
Warhammer.
Yeah, the hard part about painting them for me was always it's just so teeny
I
tiny,
couldn't do it.
you know? Like I could paint like the airplanes, right? Like cuz
Yeah.
you could just swash the paint on that.
Right.
But you had to get in there with like a little teeny little thing and
And they always looked just terrible,
Yeah.
actually. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like the eyeballs. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, who could even get to the eyeballs? I mean, I'm talking just the arm was like this little teeny little arm like
Yeah.
you know.
And yeah, so there was kind of a race in our family, like who had the most. There were a lot of funny, weird things that you could buy at like pop-up stores in malls. Then you could buy like minifigures, you could buy like puffball characters, all these strange things. I remember, like collecting was a big thing.
Yeah.
I would like to see that come back. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Like cute collecting.
Yeah. Obviously, the market is changing for comics, and particularly in the kids' space. You were saying earlier how there was pressure on you to put out 4 books a year.
Yeah.
I'm imagining that has largely gone away.
It is. So right now we're doing a Sunny book about every 2 years. That's our schedule right now. So I'll start. This one just came out, so I'll go home after Christmas. I'll start the next Sunny book.
Okay.
So yeah, and
Do you-
that's it's completely leisurely compared to our history. It's still a ton of work, and the last 6 months are brutal of the production.
Sure.
Mostly for Matt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And how much of the change in production too comes from just your growing popularity, so there's not as much pressure to create as much? Is that
think
fair?
that's a little fair, but it's also with the Sunny books we have more help. So actually we don't color them. We have an amazing colorist, Lark Pien, who does Jean Yang stuff. So she takes that over, and whereas Matt was actually doing a lot of all the page design
Right.
and layout for Baby Mouse. Our art director at Graphics in New York is really flies that ship of getting all the art in and putting it together.
Yeah. Do you feel like the pipeline over there is up to speed in terms now of?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the Scholastic Graphics pipeline it's phenomenal because on one of the books, my brother Matt was living in China because his wife's a fashion designer, so they were living in Shenzhen, China, like not. So he was in China, I was in California, Lark was in Oregon. We have somebody who drops in the text who was living in San Francisco, I think. And then we had our crew in New York, and we called our art director, he was like the MacGyver, because files were flying in from different time zones around the world. And because of the internet, we got it put together without too much fuss,
neat.
honestly.
Yeah, that's super neat.
Yeah.
That's super neat. Did you have any formal writing training? Did you go to school for it, or?
I did not. I am like the product of a liberal arts education.
Yeah.
So I went to a tiny college that nobody's heard of called Dickinson College in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's a little liberal arts college, maybe 2,000 kids. And I studied international relations. I wanted to be a diplomat.
Interesting.
I know.
Interesting. You and Shirley Temple Black.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it just goes to show you can just, you know. And I started writing my first book at night to amuse myself.
To amuse yourself.
Yeah,
So as a lark,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely, so I was a crazy reader as a kid. And when I was finally published, our neighbor said that he wasn't surprised because his memory of me as a child was standing on our front lawn with a rake. I was supposed to be raking the leaves, and I was just standing there with the book. So I was a voracious reader, but I came from a big family, 5 kids, and we didn't know writers. It was not it didn't seem like a practical career.
Right.
You know, and my dad was a doctor. He was a pediatrician. My mom was a pediatric nurse. And so, you know, we were just encouraged to have, you know, get a job when you're out of this house.
Sure.
So
sure.
it never seemed like a realistic opportunity. And I started to get the bug to want to write in college a little bit, but even then I wasn't in the English program, and so I didn't have the money to go and get an MFA after school or anything like that. So it was too far out of reach for me.
Right.
And then by the time my brother came up, so he was the baby, and you know the babies in the family, it's much easier for them to get their way with the parents. So, so when he went to school, he did actually. He minored in art and majored in English, and he had a little bit of, and he'd always been drawing his whole life, but he had an internship with Tony Auth, who was the political cartoonist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, who died in the last couple of years. But that was, he originally wanted to be a comics, you know, a newspaper comic, because that was all of the rage with Calvin and Hobbes. So he was kind of like, came from the Calvin and Hobbes Bloom County thing. So he first wanted to do that, and then he thought maybe he wanted to be a political cartoonist. But after interning with Tony, he decided that he's actually not that interested in politics. So you have to be very angry about politics every single day. He said he used to, you know, go into the office and hear people screaming constantly, and he's kind of a quiet kid, or as a grown-up even. So
it was pretty early on that you won the Newbery, yeah?
Yeah, it was my first book.
Your first book?
Yeah, that was crazy. I know. I know. I wasn't even on my radar.
Right.
I was just happy to have been published, honestly. So.
And did that just sort of change everything in your life?
It made it much easier for me to keep being published at that point. I didn't quit my day job, so I still worked in advertising for years after that, in fact. But I slowly went from full-time, and then I would freelance as a producer and take on another book contract. And it took me, you know, I don't know, about 10 years before I could become a full-time writer.
Okay.
After my...
Even after winning a Newbery?
Yeah, because the advances take forever.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah. Because I just assumed that, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like once you win that Newbery, like every library in America buys your book.
It does. They do, but it's still, you know, takes years to get paid. And yeah, so no, I didn't quit overnight.
Okay.
In fact, I would discourage creators. It's like there's much more pressure when you have to, a little something, sometimes you can lose some of the creative stuff when you are having to do it for money a little bit.
Sure, that makes sense.
You
Yeah,
know?
that makes a lot of sense.
You can you take less risks, I think.
Yeah. If you were to give a single piece of advice to someone who wanted to do comics or writing in general, what would it be?
I mean, I think the best way, so Matt and I are huge fans of like fan fiction and fan art. Like the way you learn to be an artist. I mean, Matt this is me channeling my brother, he feels like he learned by first copying other people, like, start drawing Garfield, draw Garfield a ton of times, like, and that's the way a lot of the, in the olden days, the great artists learned how to paint by copying other artists. And so once you start doing that, you'll start to learn a lot of your basic art skills, and then you'll feel comfortable, and then eventually you'll create your own characters. So I think doing fan art, doing fan fiction, that's just good, like building your muscle to then write your own stuff. So.
Sounds good to me. Any last questions from the room here? Your last chance. All right. Oh, you got one. Good.
Wait, who in your family read Calvin and Hobbes again?
We all did. We all read it. So I loved it. Matt read it. I think so. We had a real hand-me-down. We called it a hand-me-down library in the house, where, there was quite a big age spread between the kids. So we just had books lying around, and you could just read what anybody was reading. Although usually there was a lot of fighting over certain comics, like Calvin and Hobbes, whose room it was going to be in that year, So.
That's cool. So you've already said that there's going to be at least one more Sunny book.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's going to go long past that? Do you think you're going to get to 20 like you did with Baby Mouse?
I don't want to go to 20.
Okay.
But I have ideas for a few more.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what would be a good end to it, but a few, I can see at least 3 more. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to plug?
No, check out Sunny. Hopefully you like it, and then go to your game store and get D&D, and start playing D&D.
Sounds good to me. Well, excellent. I want to thank you, Jennifer, for coming out
Thank you for having me.
talking to us. I loved the book. We all loved the book, right, guys? Yeah! And the book is Sunny Rolls the Dice, so if you're sitting at home and you want somebody to read, I'm looking at that camera. If you want somebody to read and you want a good book, this is good. And if you want to learn about growing up in the 70s, this is also a really good book. I grew up in the 70s, so it all felt really real to me. I remembered many of these things. And yeah, that Sunny Rolls the Dice. Next month's book is Lily the Thief by, and I'm not going to do this right, Janne Kikkonen, I think, maybe. He's Finnish.
Awesome. I'm Finnish.
Okay.
Rock on.
And he's Finnish in that he only speaks
Finnish?
Is it Finnish or is it? It's not Dutch.
No, it's Finnish.
It's Finn.
Yeah.
Okay. And so he will not be being interviewed by us next month because he doesn't have a word of English and was not willing to have a translator. So instead, this will be really neat. At least I think it'll be really neat. We've got an editor. The editor of the book, Robin Brennan, is going to talk to us about how they pick books, how they translate books, and we'll learn about a whole nother part of making comics that you've never heard about. So that'll be next month's.
Love that.
Next month's interview. Well, yeah, because I couldn't do. I had to come up with something to do for the book.
Brilliant.
So that'll be, I think, the 18th. But we'll send out a note about that soon enough. If you guys are here today, you can pick this up. Otherwise, this month's book was Sunny Rolls the Dice. We love it. I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank you for coming out. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank The Beat for sponsoring us, www.comicsbeat.com, best website about comics news and information. And thank you all. We'll see you next month. Yay. And we're out. Yay! All right, so if everybody will just be calm for a minute. Hey, stay in your seats for just a sec. Let me get some of the stuff off the other